J.D. Lewis, who is a longtime friend of the Symposium. He is very prolific. He's very important. He's an advisor for the 25th committee, 250th committee. He's on the board of the Francis Marion Symposium and a member of the South Carolina American Revolutionary Trust. He has published many things, but for an example, he published 3 volumes of the North Carolina Revolutionary War, the complete uses of the military and continental troops. He names 25,000 soldiers. If it's available, he can find it, as you will find today, as he presents to us on the 250th anniversary of the 1775 in South Carolina. J.D.
Is it good? Okay. Thank you, Miss Chris. My heart beats. Okay, thank you, Carol, for inviting me here today. You guys are wonderful. Thank you, folks out in the audience, for taking time out of your busy lives to be here this weekend. It is a gorgeous day out there. I would almost rather be fishing, except that I hate fishing. So, we're going to tell a little bit about the 250th anniversary of 1775. Just a quick reminder, this is my website, which is www.carolatlanta.com. That was the original name of the colony. For those of you the first time here, everything in it is free to be used by whomever, however they want, as long as they cite Carolatlanta.com. You can use the maps, the text, the images, whatever. There's no advertisement, and I'm not selling anything. It's just for the sake of the whole country to have access to this information. Yep. FYI, if you were to print it all out, it would be over 30,000 pages. If you were to print out the Rev War in the 2 Carolinas, it would be almost 10,000 pages. And guess what? I just added the Civil War, which nobody here cares about. Okay, I don't know how some of you have been, how long some of you have been around, but you remember Groucho Marx. He said, I would never join any organization that would have me as a member. Well, I'm proud to say that I'm a member of all 3 of these organizations, and I'm very proud to be with them. They are awesome. So we go forward. As you all know, this is the Francis Marion Symposium. We are here to honor and revere Francis Marion. He was born in 1732. He died in 1795. If you also notice on the title of this symposium, about 7 or 8 years ago, Carol and George decided to open this up to the life and times of Francis Marion, because we were running out of all the battles that he had participated in. So the life and times mean anything that happened during his lifetime, from 1732 to 1795. That's why you see a little bit broader exposure to other topics, but we still revere and honor Francis Marion. For those of you who are not historians, I bet there's not one out there, but for if you're into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, you know that the average velocity equals distance over time. You see up here, let me see if I can get my pointer to work here.
J.D., can I say something? He was born 4 days after George Washington.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know how your pointer went up. Anyway, he was born in Goatfield Plantation. He was buried at his brother's Belle Isle Plantation, and the distance is between 30 and 35 miles. So over a 63-year period, he averaged a half a mile a day. I thought that was an interesting tidbit. Okay. Long time ago, my dear old pappy warned me that there are 3 subjects of taboo in public speaking. Today, I'm going to break 2 of them. We're going to talk politics. We're going to talk religion. The nice thing is, it's only going to be about the year 1775, not today's politics or religion. You're going to realize that those 2 topics are key to the whole year. You're going to find out that the 3rd one we are not going to talk about. And if you have any questions about what the 3rd one is, see me after the meeting. Anyway, in all seriousness, I'd like for each of you to lean back, get comfortable, and realize that you are living now in the year 1775 in South Carolina. What transpired? What were the major items taking place? What was the mood of the citizens? Some of you may be living along the coast. Some of you may be living in the upcountry. Some of you would be living in the Midlands. But some of you were loyalists. In the political world back then, loyalists were considered Tories. Now, their terms of politics was slightly different than ours today. The Loyalists were Tories and the Patriots were Whigs. And they had different viewpoints. The Loyalists supported King and Crown. The Patriots supported breaking away. And there was a huge contingent of both in this state at that time. But what you don't know is, you're going to find out in the next few minutes, is how that evolved real quickly in the year 1775. So you see the list of topics we're going to cover. I've got to go backwards a little bit so you can understand where we came from. Prelude. Back in 1730, just before Marion was born, this is what the state looked like. The population was all along the coast. 90% plus were members of the Church of England, which we know of as Anglican Church. And in America today, it's something else. We have 4 counties. Craven County, oops, I'm hitting the wrong thing. Sorry, folks. All right, Craven, Berkeley, Colleton, Granville, and they started breaking it into the Anglican parishes, which is very important, and you're going to find out why soon. 1730 through 1734 and 1764 to 65, South Carolina created 13 townships. And they were spread out all over the state by Governor Robert Johnson. And you'll see that Scots-Irish, German Lutherans, Scots-Irish, Welsh, Scots-Irish. So you can read all of that along the lines. The key is that that was a very diverse group of people. The Lutherans were Germans. They were called Deutsch back then, and everybody in South Carolina called them the Dutch, which was incorrect, but they were Germans. And they were brought over by King George II. Because King George and his father, the first, were from New Hanover in Germany. And they had an affinity for the New World and decided to provide relief. These others that are spread out, you'll see that they're Swiss immigrants from French and Germany. There's more Swiss immigrants here, then there's more there. French Huguenots in the 1760s, and there's others there. 1740, we're moving forward 10 years at a time. You'll see the Welsh tract was established in 36. The big contingent of Huguenots came in 1732. Marion was one of those. His parents were. So you see the settlement sort of expanded. The whole goal was to create settlement all the way back to the Indian Territory. 1750, we have a few more coming in. You're going to find that most of the people that settled in the interior came from the north, from Maryland, from Pennsylvania, from Delaware, etc. They were mostly, at this time, Scots-Irish. Okay, we're up to the 1750s. We know about the French and Indian War, which was from 1756 to 1763. It only affected South Carolina for a couple of years, and it was called the Cherokee War here. I'm not going to read all of this, but there were events that happened. Colonel William Moultrie of Charleston was one of the leaders, and Francis Marion was a lieutenant at the time, and they both participated in the French and Indian, the Cherokee Wars. By 1760, you'll see that we had new roads coming in. This is called the Fall Line Road. This is beginnings of the Great Wagon Train, and this is the Upper Road. Of course, the King's Highway was already completed, but we have a lot more settlement in here. And again, there's more Huguenots, more Scots-Irish, and more Germans. The Scots-Irish were predominantly Presbyterians. There was a good sect of Baptists also, which were Scots-Irish. Back at that point in time, they were called Anabaptists, and they were considered to be of the Calvinist background. So it's slightly different than the Baptists today, but not a lot. The Germans were Lutherans. The Highland Scots did not come to South Carolina in big numbers, but there were a few. They were mostly settled around Cross Creek, which is in Fayetteville, North Carolina. The Highland Scots had just gotten beaten by the British, so they refused to take up arms against the British, so they were all loyalists. These Scots-Irish were split almost 50-50, whereas the German Lutherans, who owed their friendliness to King George II, refused to take up arms. So the religion played a very big role in who took which side. And as I said earlier, the majority of the coastal folks were Anglicans. One side note is that Charleston had a fairly sizable contingent of the Jewish faith. And they were one of the few along the East Coast that did. Conversely, they had almost zero Catholics. South Carolina did not embrace the Catholic religion very much at all. And it got to the point to where nobody would profess it or admit it. So here we have shaping up to the 1760s. Sides are being taken place. We've already got the beginnings of not war, but discontent with the crown. So in 1768, they decided that the folks were ticked off that they had to go all the way to Charleston to record a deed. So they opened up district courts in these districts. And the district courthouses were defined, and it gave people access to closer control of their destiny. Then the War of Regulation hit. The War of Regulation happened in North Carolina and South Carolina, and it was mostly the backcountry folks were getting sort of yanked around by bureaucrats. They were getting given new taxes, new fees, new what have you, and they rebelled and said, no, we're not going to take this anymore. It was very violent in North Carolina. It was not so violent here in South Carolina, but it happened for just a couple of years in South Carolina. There's a list of all the things that happened. But as the colony drifted towards revolution, the backcountry tended to dominantly loyalists. And that was how things shaped up by 1771. All right. Sorry. As you see, by 1770, a lot more settlement, a lot more roads, a few more towns. You'll see that the population was 45,000 people with over 80,000 slaves. Now this is for the whole state. And of course, way back then, the state extended out to the Mississippi and took up a lot of Georgia too at the time, but that got changed. So you'll see that a few towns sprung up at this time. Now here's the key. By 1775, total of 70,000 whites, 105,000 slaves. Of the 70,000 whites, as Mr. McIntyre explained yesterday, Charleston was the fourth largest city in America, behind New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. But the population of Charleston was only 12,000. So that left 38,000. No, I'm guessing on 30. My math is off. Anyway, there were not that many people out in the hinterlands, is what I was trying to get across. But they were a variety of loyalists and Whigs. Okay, last of the prelude to the Revolution. So we know that Benjamin Franklin had an idea for 13 colonies to get together as early as 1773. And in December of 73, South Carolinians began to assemble. And they had meetings that were not sanctioned by the governor. In 74, they appointed a general committee to monitor British abuses. They also elected representatives for a provincial congress. They didn't call it a provincial congress back then because they just called it a congress. But since there was one in Philadelphia, it became known as the Continental Congress, and everything in the colony became a provincial congress. You see the 5 men who were elected to represent South Carolina, and the first Continental Congress met in Philadelphia in 74. And then in November, the South Carolina Patriots called for a provincial Congress, and in December, elections were held. Now we're at 1775. 250 years ago, you're there. Some of you are poor. Some of you are dirt farmers. Some of you are merchants in Charleston or Georgetown. Some of you, like Joseph Kershaw, established a store up in Pine Tree Hill and renamed the town Camden. For everybody's understanding, back at that point in time, there was no middle class in South Carolina. There were planters, the plantation class, and there were dirt poor farmers. Then there, of course, were slaves. Now, the closest thing to a middle class was the merchant class. The merchants in Charleston, in Georgetown, and other growing towns were a little better off than your average farmer, but they sure were nowhere near as good as the big plantation owners. One quick reminder, the difference between North Carolina and South Carolina is North Carolina was settled by small-time farmers from Virginia that sneaked down. They mostly had 10 to 15 acres and no slaves. South Carolina was settled by Barbadians, and they were used to the huge plantations. And South Carolina had a big plantation class, and there were some very wealthy men in South Carolina. So imagine yourself, you pick which one you want to be, But you're back in 1775, maybe like Christopher Gadsden, you're walking the wharfs in Charleston, but you just built, and you're thinking, "To hell with the Brits." Well, you might be a backwoodsman back in Spartanburg area, and you say, "You know what? Hell with these patriots. God and King is what I'm after." And it starts a bubbling. And as it bubbles, you're going to see a quick timeline of what transpired over 1775. January through December. We're going to do a quick look at the continental bigger picture. Battle of Lexington in April. Christopher Gadsden and the Congress met in Philadelphia. The U.S. Army was established. The Post Office was established. The Navy was established, and the Marines were established. Now, we know there were a lot more events that went on up north and in other states, but I can't put them all on one page. So I just decided to pick these. But in South Carolina, we had a provincial Congress in Charleston, and that was led by Mr. William Bull Jr. He was not a governor, he was an acting governor because the recent governor had left. But that was convened 15 times under his tutelage. It met here, and it met here. And it met right before this. And then we elected the provincial Congress in South Carolina for the Patriots. We had elections for the second, and the second Congress was here. And then you find out, here are the delegates to the Second Continental Congress, etc. Nice to know there's something called the Drayton-Tennant Hart Expedition. Has anybody here ever heard of the Drayton? A lot more than I thought there would. It was a banner event. And not an event, it was an expedition, but the results were very solid for South Carolina. So during this time, the first Provincial Congress established 17 regiments of militia and 6 independence companies. Here, their second session, they created 3 regiments of provincial troops. They were not on the Continental Line yet, because there was no Continental Line. But the 1st Regiment, the 2nd Regiment, and the 3rd Regiment, which was Rangers. We had 16 regiments of militia and 7 independent companies. We had the 4th of artillery established in November. And then the Craven County Regiment was split into 2 regiments, also in November. Here are 18 military events that took place. They're all in here. One note, from here on, you're going to see a hell of a lot of data. Do not try to read it. Do not try to memorize it. It's too much. Even I can't do it. This presentation is on my website, and it's available for free if anybody wants to go back and relook at it. I'm pretty sure that Cheryl will post it, or Carol will post it to Francis Marion's website also. So if your eyes start glazing over, I'm going to start yelling, because you might be getting bored. But the key is that a lot happened. Okay, so the parishes, the district, in 74, 75, they had it set up to where all the military was set up by district, and each parish had to supply at least 1 company of men. Some had to supply 10 companies of men. That's how it's all set up, and this is why it's so important that you understand how this came about. You'll see the Orangeburg district got broken into 4. Saxe-Gotha, St. Matthews, Orange Parish, and this one that was so long I don't even like to read it. Camden district was split into 2. The 96th district was split into the Little River, Lower, and Spartan. And then, of course, there was by itself the new acquisition district, which was just created in 1772. Prior to 1772, new acquisition All that area up there was considered part of North Carolina, Tryon County. And there were so many deed problems that it took years to sort out. No, you do not live in North Carolina, you live in the new acquisition district. Okay, so we look at the roads and rivers. Everybody says, why? Well, the roads and rivers where they cross is where most of the battles took place. Not all of them, that's where most of them took place. But you'll see that they had a fairly decent infrastructure to get around. But they were not driving Teslas, they were not driving Nissan Altimas, they were riding horses, and down in this area they were riding Marsh Cactus. Okay. This is the Common House of Assembly, the last one, for everybody to understand. Lord William Campbell convened the last one, and then he dissolved it. He got here in July of 1775. It was set up to where you had the Common House, and this was how it was segregated, and then the upper house was called the Executive Council. And 20 members were appointed by the Crown. I have never been able to glean a name of one of them for this particular assembly. But I've got almost all of these that were there. So that was convened, and the next day, the first provincial congress, led by the Patriots, the Whigs, was held also in Charleston. And you'll see quite a big difference in the breakout. Quite a big difference in the number of delegates. So this is just for the very first one. You'll see they broke it down into the judicial district and then into the election district, which was either these funky districts that you know, I don't know, then you see the parishes. So that's how it was set up. As you will see, Francis Marion was a member of the first provincial congress. In January of 1775. He represented St. John's, Berkeley Parish. So Henry Lawrence was elected president. They elected the 5 members to the Continental Congress. They did all these things like this vision. And you'll see that the people in blue text were members that also served in the earlier House of Commons. So they just walked out of one room and walked into another and said, we're going to be patriots from now on. In this first session, there were 193 members. In the second session, there were 214. So folks, if you are from South Carolina, these are some of your founding fathers of the state of South Carolina. About 5 years ago, I gave a presentation on the founding fathers of South Carolina and enumerated 1,116 names who should be considered and venerated as the founding fathers of South Carolina. When I presented it, Charles Baxley, my dear friend, may he rest in peace, I love him dearly, he was astounded. And I said, Charles, I've never astounded you in my life. You always astound me. He says, JD, now I understand how we made it. Because I was thinking 10 to 12. How the heck did they win the 10 to 12 founding fathers? But with 1,100, it was too big to rig. Okay. So, these were a council of safety, and you're going to see a name on here that comes up a lot later, William Henry Drayton. These were all the council of safety that were elected. Lawrence was president. They had the same people elected to the Second Continental Congress, and then they mustered in 17 regiments. Then Henry Middleton was elected president of the Second Continental Congress. Going back real quick to this, see that we have got now representation all the way back to Indian country, to the upcountry. There's people who are elected to represent their people. Now, for this very first provincial congress, some of them were loyalists. Not a lot, but there were at least 5 to 10 that were loyalists. Guess what? They didn't get elected again. So, they met again in Charleston in June. They ordered provincial troops. Campbell arrived, and he dissolved the last assembly. The key items that they addressed was South Carolina exports to Great Britain were prohibited. Committees of observation and inspection were appointed. Oath of association. You must obey the patriots. You must be a patriot. You must sign this paper and say that I agree to not be a damn loyalist. That went over like a lead balloon, but it did happen. They had a requirement to sign the oath of association. And then they held elections for the next provincial Congress. So as you can see here, by March 1st of 1775, these are the regiments of militia that were created along with all the independent companies. A regiment is supposed to have 10 companies of 100 men each. Not one of them had 10 companies. And very few companies ever got above 40 or 50. Most had 20 to 30. But they were considered regiments, and they had a line of order of hierarchy of order. So these are the independent companies that were established. These were established by the provincial Congress. This is not me just making it up. You can read the journals. And then they had all these districts as well as counties had their own militia. The one that blows my mind the most is that one, the Fairfield Regiment. Fairfield County wasn't established until 1785. It was never even mentioned before 1785. Where the heck did the name Fairfield Regiment come from? I have dug and dug and dug and dug and no dug, not dug back in there. I digged and digged and digged. Joseph Kershaw, who lived in Pine Tree Hill, which became Camden, was assigned the colonel of the Fairfield Regiment in 1775. It's a fact. By June, we added the 3 regiments of provincial troops, and this is where Marion served in the 2nd Regiment under Colonel William Moultrie. The independent companies got shuffled a little bit. These pretty much stayed the same. Okay, mentioned the Drayton Tennant Hart expedition. Part of the second part of the first provincial Congress in June, they decided to send this expedition into the backcountry of South Carolina to win over hearts and minds. They decided that William Henry Drayton, who was probably the richest man in South Carolina at the time, if he wasn't, he was dang close to it. He was also on the first provincial Congress, and he was actually president of the 2nd provincial Congress. The man was a mover and a shaker, and he was a no-nonsense kind of guy. So they decided to send him out with papers to sign your association. You are going to be the patriot. And they coerced, with William Tennant, and there you go. There's William Henry Dayton. At the time, he was 33 years old. He was a committee of the secret. He was chairman of the secret committee. He was a mover and a shaker, but he died of typhus in Philadelphia because he was elected to the Continental Congress, and he died in Philly of typhus, way too young. His focus was he ordered busters, he issued orders, he harangued, he threatened, he did all kinds of stuff. But it was his goal to convert as many loyalists as possible to the Patriot cause. William Tennant was originally from New Jersey, and he had a master's degree. He was a Presbyterian. Talking politics and religion at the same time. Mr. Oliver Hart was a Baptist minister. In fact, he led the largest congregation of Baptists in Charleston for quite a while. They decided that these three men would go to the backcountry and preach and cajole and harangue. Tennant's approach was reasoned, debated. He did do a little haranguing, and he did a whole lot of preaching. Oliver Hart talked, preached, consulted, and expounded. He was a little bit of a moderator. All three men wrote a journal. I have not dug out all of their journals. But a young lady in the 1940s dug them out and summarized it for me, and I said, I'm going to use her stuff instead of me going through 10,000 pages. She was brilliant. So, they also took along with them two militia colonels, Joseph Kershaw of Fairfax, Fairfield, and Richard Richardson Sr., who's essentially from Clarendon County, this area. Look at the difference in age. Joseph Kershaw was 38. At this point in time, Richardson was already 71 years old. Sorry. Each of them had at their disposal a boatload of militiamen. I use the term boatload because it's immeasurable. I have not found out how many men they had. At one point, they brought together 300. At another point, they brought together 600. And I'm like, okay, did he have 300? Did he have 300? And then I found out there were other people involved, and I'm like, they probably had over 1,000 men at their disposal. Did they need them? We'll find out. So, this is a quick look at their task. They trekked from Charleston up to Columbia area, which Columbia didn't exist at the time, but it was at Fort Granby, just across the river. And essentially, Hart left a week early. Tennant and Drayton left together, and then they all split up. You go this way, you go that way, you go this way. And they only met up 3 times during the whole thing. And they went from here to here to here. One of them broke off and went over this way, went around about, came back down, and they came here and they came in. So this is all of their stops enumerated and on what dates, where they were. You see the 3 asterisks. They were basically going into loyalist country, and they would actually take over small churches and get up, and Tennant and Hart would preach, here's why it's good for you Presbyterians and you Baptists to join the Patriot cause. And if you don't like it, we're going to beat the heck out of it. that was Drayton's words, not the 2 preachers. Drayton was very hostile. He made a lot of people mad. But he also, and the 3 men won over a sizable number of what we would think would be loyalists to the Patriot cause. Now, what they forget to tell you, and what the young lady that summarized this forgot to tell you is that this launched the first battle of '96, because the loyalists that they sort of smacked around, including Thomas Fletcher, said, yeah, we're going to go take 96. That was a few months later, but it was essentially after this was over. We'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, they all ended up coming back. One went to Augusta, Georgia. And then as you can see, he made it from Augusta back to Charleston. The other two, that was Tennant. The other two went back to Fort Granby and then walked back down to Charleston. But it was a several-month event, and they claimed that they had over 1,000 people to sign the association. We got to remember there weren't that many back there to begin with, so that was the big expedition. As you see here, there is the association. This is what we agreed to do, folks. We will go forth and be ready to sacrifice our lives and fortunes to secure freedom and safety. Sign it, please. Here is the circular letter that went out before them. And the letter was transmitted by horse, by expedited riders. Go take this to every community you can find and every church you can find. We're coming. We want you to come talk to us, and we'll let Drayton harangue you, and we'll let Hart preach to you. So, there it is. That's from July 31st to September 16th. There are sort of a summary of all that transpired. I'm not going to read all of it. However, the German Lutherans refused. They said flat out, no, we will not join your association. We love God and King. Thomas Fletchall was a noted loyalist. At the Fair Forest Meeting House, they arrived with another pastor and a third pastor. Major James Robinson was a loyalist, Thomas Brown, and one of the Cunningham brothers, whether it was Robert or I don't know. Anyway, Drayton recorded that he made headway. William Tennant wrote and sent it to the council and said, it is very likely that this is going to require military action. I think Tennant was a little more accurate. Because the loyalists were not going to be mutilated. And there were a few other events that happened. Again, I won't go into all of them. They rode together for a while and split back up. On August 24th, Drayton learned that Moses Kirkland had raised a large force and was planning to attack Augusta, Georgia, and Fort Charlotte. He ordered Major Andrew Williamson. I wasn't any of the names before. Where did he come from? Andrew Williamson was 96th Regiment. William Danger Thompson was head of the 3rd Regiment of Provincials. He had 300 men. And then Richard Rickerson took 300 men to the Erie River. So the plan worked. Kirkland was so surprised that he offered to surrender. Drayton refused. Kirkland fled for refuge in Charleston with the royal governor. And then after that, Thomas Brown and Cunningham joined forces and drew up near the Saluda River, opposite 96. The two armies were now less than 10 miles together, and you could tell by their body language they didn't want to fight. So Drayton issued a written declaration. They basically signed a truce and agreed to it. And from there on, everything was hunky-dory until Fletchall and Brown decided, we kind of got screwed in this deal. We're going to 96. That's later. Okay, the results. The truce lasted about 45 days, and the first bloodshed was at 96, as I mentioned. Unknown to the loyalists, Major Williamson was dangerously short on gunpowder, and the loyalists were fretting that the reinforcements were coming. So they both agreed, it's over. We'll go home, you go home, leave us alone. So Tennant's reasoning awakened many in the backcountry to join the Patriot cause. Nobody could ever plead ignorance about what was getting ready to happen. Everybody in South Carolina above the age of enlightenment, meaning 40 years old, knew war was coming. So Hart laid out the differences of moral and religious ground rather than strictly reason. He probably didn't win over as many as him, but he helped sow the seed. So that was the famous expedition to win hearts and minds, and I would call it a moderate success. I wouldn't say it was a resounding success, but it was a moderate success. Here we have the Second Provincial Congress, which met in November of '75 for the first time. The second time was next year, so we won't talk a lot about that. But as you can see, there are now 204 members, and William Henry Drayton is the president of this provincial Congress. He was a mover and a shaker. He died too young. So, again, the election districts, there were a few changes, but not a lot. You saw that there were 4 here before, now there's only 3. This got renamed from the Upper District to the Spartan District. That's where Spartanburg got the name. And that's about it. Second Congress had a new Council of Safety. They set up or authorized the 4th Regiment of Provincial Troops, which was artillery, and much more was accomplished in 1776. Okay, so you see here that the military organization, now under the control of the Council of Safety, we have 4 provincial troop regiments. We had a smaller number of independent companies, and essentially the same group of county regiments, district regiments, except Craven was split into 2. Not going to go through each of these, there's too many. There's 18 events, but there were 18 events in South Carolina during 1775. And the very first one, just taking a look at it, you'll see that there are 3 that I cannot locate. The estimated casualties for Patriots was 2 killed, 26 wounded. British and Loyalists, 27 killed, 42 wounded, and 148 captured. But there was the Bloody Point here. There were several events in and around Charleston. Most of those were, some of the events in Charleston were the taking of the arsenal. I mean, you just walk in as with an army and say, it's mine. And they said, okay, you can have it. Then there was 96. There was an initial event there in July which had no budget. But the one that's coming up for the 250th anniversary next month was in November. And the 250th Commission is going to be there at that time with a big powwow. So if you can make it, please be there. After the Battle of 96, or very soon after, was the famous Stowe campaign. And the Stowe campaign started around Fort Mott, just above it. And it went all the way up to what is Indian Country now, but it was in Greenville County now. They had the Great Canebrake Battle that whooped the Loyalists. And then they had to march back. The march up was easy, the march back was in 2 feet of snow. And that was the event, the key events that happened in 1775. So there's the known battles that I just described. You can see in my website, any place that has a blue underscore, you can click on for more information. This is from the list, but there's the information you'll get. You'll get the name of the battle, the date, who led it on the Patriot side, who led it on the British or Loyalist side, a map showing where it happened, and a little write-up of what happened. And if you're lucky, you get the order of battle as down to the captain level, if it's known. So those are Bloody Point, State House, Fort Charlotte, in July 96, the very first one, It was mostly a detachment of the 3rd Regiment of Rangers against Moses Kirkland and Fletchall. No bloodshed. This one was in August. Fort Johnson, number 1. There were 5 loyalists captured. Sullivan's Island, long before McIntyre's July 28th. This is in September of 75. And there's the order of battle. Cummings Point, Congaree River, Mine Creek. This is the same event as this one. I got 2 sources, 2 different dates, and 2 different groups of people. But when you read the details, it has to be the same one. So anyway, I put it as 2 separate ones. Rebellion Road was a naval battle. Hawk Island Channel was a naval battle. There's 96, the one that required, that did have bloodshed. There were 52 loyalists killed, 20 wounded. 1 patriot killed, 12 wounded. And there's the map of where it took place. There's the order of battle down to the captain level on each side. And as you can see, the Patriots had a much larger army than the Loyalists. The Loyalists, they had a good representation. Charleston Harbor, Sullivan's Island again, the Great Gateway. This is the one, the beginning of the snow campaign. Patriots captured 130 loyalists and sent them to Charleston. Then finally, the snow campaign, they captured another 150. So there's the trek that they took back. There's all the different work. Then the quick sources, I always cite my sources. They're all in there. Of course, we love Jack Parker's Guys of the Red War. We seriously want John Roberts' gazetteer reinstated. Please help us, folks. Charles got it back, and the SCART owns it now. We need somebody to take it over and fix it. Because I used it way back then, and I now get inquiries. Where the heck did you find out where this battle was? Well, that source no longer exists. They don't like that answer. They think I'm making it up. Okay, so there's the gazetteer, no longer active. And then there's the young lady that did the great lieutenant, lost my mouse. And then, of course, there's a lot of sources involved. The most difficult task of sorting all this out was harmonizing the blatant discrepancies. You had one guy said there were three captains there, another guy said there were 12 captains there. I gotta pick something. Anyway, we're done. Any questions? Mr. Ed has a question.
Hang on.
Wait, we need 2 microphones.
I hate when people use that Mr. Ed. I always think of the song. Goes to the show.
My mind went blank and I couldn't remember your last name. Old age.
That's okay. JD, I know everyone feels the same way that I probably do. Our mutual friend, and for many that we miss greatly, like yourself, Charles Baxley, would be grinning from ear to ear right now. And he would use one word to describe your presentation and your work. That is very much appreciated, and that is astounding. If you are a serious student of the Southern campaigns of the American Revolution, there are 3 essentials. One is your website, the second is Parker's Guide, And the third, I have to give credit where credit is due, is Patrick O'Kelly.
Absolutely.
Blood and slaughter. And there's soon to be a fourth, the Marion papers. But
Absolutely.
probably on behalf of all of us, this was humbling. Thank you very much.
Well, I didn't put you to sleep. That was a most welcome outcome. Since you have no further questions, we're going to take a little break. Thank you, folks.